Hello, everyone. We are excitedly doing homesickness today. It's a wonderful topic. James, I think your idea.
It was my idea, and it's my idea partly because of my new project on the history of separation. A big project called Moved Apart, which is a fantastic project funded by the Swedish Research Council that I'm doing with colleagues in Sweden and in Australia. And one of the things that I've been doing a little bit of reading about recently is homesickness. You know, so how do people, when they are moved apart, so they're living apart, they're travelling apart for various reasons, they're either separated through trade, through business, diplomacy, maybe it's related to industrialization, it's about adventure, it's about conquest, it's about people being dislocated through war, through famine, through persecution, and what are the emotional feelings connected to that? And some of those are about loneliness and longing and missing people, but also there is a sense when you are moved away from your home that you have a yearning or a longing to sort of return to that home. And so in some ways it's several things. It's a sort of sense in which people feel a yearning or longing to go back to a childhood home. They want to go back home to connect with family, with loved ones, but also it's a sort of sense of a metaphorical home as well. And it's a connection to a kind of distant past. And that's something that's much more difficult to sort of conceptualize, because often the sense of a sort of distant home or a distant past becomes very sort of romanticized, and it's something that you can never ever capture. And I think when I try and sort of think about this, I think about in one of Stephen Fry's volumes of his many autobiographies, I think he's written about 4 now, and I can't remember where it is, but he talks about trying to go back to Cambridge, where he was an undergraduate student, member of Footlights, and he says the problem is that it's like going back to where the circus once was. The circus has gone and has moved on, and for him, Cambridge in his youth was about, it wasn't simply the place, it was about the people. It was about the people that were there, and those people had all moved on and weren't there. So his Cambridge just no longer exists because it is those people. So for me, homesickness is all of those things. It is about being separated from people, dislocated. It's wanting to go back. It's wanting to reconnect with people, but it's also this illusory sense of home or of wanting to be somewhere. So there we are. There's a little starter for 10.
Well, it's a very good starter for 10, James. And it reminds us that it's a kind of a fundamentally historical problem. It's astonishing how regularly this comes up with our Histories of the Unexpected episodes. So here's the thing. It's a kind of comparative, isn't it? It's homesickness is, yes, it's nostalgia, it's fondness for place and memory, but it's a comparative between what now, you're the life you're living it now, the life you're experiencing it now, and then, like where you've come from, which is in the past, and it's how you remember that bit. It's not how you experience that bit. It's completely different. It's it's your memory of how you experienced it. So it's how you live your life now, and then it's that being compared to how you remember that experience of being before. And so, essentially we've got to remember that past has gone. It's a memory. It's not real, but your life as you're living it now is real, and it's experienced in a fundamentally different way. So there are some really interesting historical problems with this, because people, I think, will end up being homesick for perhaps an experience that was not as nice as they suspect. There's a bit of rose-tinted spectacles often going on, and there's also a kind of crazy. I wrote down here cornucopia of emotion ? And I'm not sure what I was going to talk about.
No, definitely a cornucopia of emotion.
I think it's to do with the complexities of it. So, can your homesickness change from location to location? Like, can you be more homesick for one place than you can for another? So homesickness is not like a level thing. It changes according to the way you remember it. And the other point as well is worth thinking about is they say, yes, I'm homesick, but that the kind of the level of that homesickness can change, not necessarily about where you're being homesick for. So you can be more or less homesick at any one point. And I think that the point I wanted to make was that the more you think about homesickness, the more complicated it gets. If you question why you are being homesickness, how accurate your memories of your home are, and how it impacts you and affects you every day. So, wanted to kind of explode it and say it really isn't that simple. And also, it runs two ways, which is really interesting. So, you talk about someone being homesick. It's like, but I feel homesick because I'm in China and I miss my kids at home, right? But if someone is being homesick, it definitely happens the other way. So home can be sick for you, and there's definitely two ways of looking at it, which I think historians need to think about.
Yeah, and also with that, there's an implicit tension, because you know that you are going to be homesick, but yet so take for example you going off to China, or a sort of colonial ruler, official, going off to India or wherever. There is a sense in which you need to do that. There's a part of you that needs to do that is about adventure, that is about, in the ruler's sort of example, you're thinking about somebody that has to go out and follow rules and establish empire, etc., whatever we feel about that. But at the same time, there is that tension that you want to be at home. So there's that tension between sort of, needing to do something, wanting to do something, having to do something, but also doing that sort of, pulls you apart from family. And so that's
that could be a real trigger for it, can't it?
Yeah.
What triggers it is interesting. And also there's the coping mechanisms of homesickness and how that has changed over time. Which is all has a lot to do with technology, and it's so easy to zoom people and to take photos and send things, and that certainly alleviates things. Letter writing, I think, in the past was one way of doing it, a kind of a way of proving to yourself that you cared. By sitting down and taking the time to write, not knowing how long that letter was going to take, and if it would even get there, which of course links to the impact of letters and missives, whatever they might be, arriving from distant shores. The reasons for separation, of course, is an important part of this. There are so many ways. I mean, there's I just scribbled down a few: marriage breakdown, orphans, war, refugees. But I'm going to start by talking about different types of journey, was what got me thinking about this. And the furthest possible type of journey is, of course, going to space. And there are some wonderful examples.
Yes.
Yeah. Hence the spaceman. I started off thinking about kind of long voyages, around the world, people going away for a year and a half, like Francis Drake or whatever it is, sailing around the world, and wars and travelling and people being forced to travel. So it's like enforced homesickness, which I'll come back to later. But then there's the people choosing to go away. This is a lovely story. This is from the 1990s. So 97, you've got an American astronaut called Jerry Lininger, and he goes to the Mir space station for 5 months. And he leaves behind a pregnant wife, 14-month-old son, and he promises to write every day. And he has 130 days on the Mir space station. The space station's a complete shambles. So the Mir space station was launched in the mid-80s. So by 97, it was 11 or so years old, and they suffered terrible glitches. There was a fire, electrical shorts, really terrifying and very miserable. And it's interesting seeing how his letters change from a kind of routine day-to-day, daddy's up here doing this stuff, to a frankly terrifying and emotional, moving story. His first one's wonderful. It's called I Am Still an Earthling, 23rd of January 1997. Dear John, this is his son. I decided before this flight that I was going to be a good father and write to you every day. This is my first attempt at that. I realise you are only 1 year old, and although I exaggerate your talents like any proud father would, I don't think that you can quite read this yet. No problem. When you can, you'll feel good knowing that your father loves you. Spaceflight is a dangerous business. I used to be pretty cavalier about it, but just before this launch, I started questioning what I was about to do. You see, I have so much to lose now. You and your mother. I always liked adventures. I remember exhausting the elementary school library of mystery books by someone I think was named Orton, trying to figure out the ending before the ending, anticipating, observing the situation and trying to predict the outcome, reading about people who were in unusual situations and studying how they were challenged and how they responded. Anyway, that curiosity characteristic is what got me on this space station. Sure, I went to lots of schools, did pretty well in our great United States Navy, went through all the mechanics of the application and interview process, but the basic trait of insatiable curiosity is what drove me through all of that. Space is a frontier. I'm out here exploring for 5 months. What a privilege. But I sure do miss you. Want most of all to see you come stumbling around the corner, bellow out your big laugh when I give my surprised to see you look, and watch you stumble back out of the room to do the same to Mum in the other room. You are the best son in the world, John. You know, although I'm up here floating above the earth, I am still an earthling. I feel the pain of separation, the pride of a father and the loneliness of a husband, away from his wife like an earthling, and maybe even a bit more acutely. Good night, my son. I will be watching over you. So that is one of several fantastic letters written back from space, and it just gives us one aspect of understanding homesickness in the 90s in space, and it also raises quite an interesting question of who gets the opportunity to be homesick, James, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? I mean, you were talking earlier about people being sent around the world, whether they're working for the government. It must be a common thing, and you've got sailors taking the ships out there. But in this instance, who wants to be homesick is got its own history. It's fascinating. So this guy, he is a extraordinary person. He's got a Bachelor of Science from the United States Naval Academy. He becomes a captain in the US Naval Medical Corps. He's got a doctorate in medicine, a Master of Science degree in Systems Management, a Master of Public Health degree in Health Policy, a Doctor of Philosophy in Epidemiology, and as I said before, he's a captain in the US Naval Medical Corps, but most of all, he's a man. And in this period of space travel, being a man was a fairly significant help in allowing you to go to space, which would therefore allow you to be homesick from space. There's a wonderful little letter here from the 1960s from a lady called Linda Halpern, and she decided to fulfill a school assignment by writing to see if she could pursue a dream. So she wrote to President Kennedy asking him what she needed to do to become an astronaut. And NASA write back and they say, President Kennedy has asked this office to thank you for your recent letter. Your willingness to serve your country as a volunteer woman astronaut is commendable. However, while many women are employed in other capacities in the space program, some of them in extremely important scientific posts, we have no present plans to employ women on space flights because of the degree of scientific and flight training and the physical characteristics which are required. We appreciate your interest in and support of the nation's space program, which opens up a whole new window of who is doing the homesickness from space. The first woman to fly into space was a Russian, did it in 1963. She was a textile factory assembly worker, Valentina Tereshkova, rather than a pilot like her male cosmonaut colleagues. And this was interesting. So Sally Ride, the first American female astronaut, goes into space in 1983. So that is 20 years after Linda Halpern wrote to President Kennedy. And when she was interviewed by the press just before she goes up, she was asked about her reproductive organs and whether she would cry if things went wrong on the job. So for me, homesickness is all about space travel. It's all about sexism. It's also all about the history of paternal relationships. And it's absolutely fascinating. Histories of the Unexpected demonstrates that everything has a history, even the most unexpected of subjects.
Like the bubble.
Or clouds.
Or the scar.
Or the paperclip.
Or cats.
Dust.
The signature.
Chimneys.
Courage.
Boxes.
The itch.
Holes.
Dreams.
Hair.
Or mountains.
Well, you can find out about all of these and so much more in our new book, Histories of the Unexpected.
Or you can listen to our podcasts in your podcast app.
And check us out online at historiesoftheunexpected.com.